The sun beats down on the gathering in Jonestown, Guyana, as Reverend Jim Jones stands on the stage, his voice booming through the loudspeakers. It's November 18, 1978, and the air is thick with tension. Jones's words are laced with a sense of urgency and desperation, his eyes gleaming with a fanatic's intensity. The crowd before him is a mix of the faithful and the fearful, all united in their devotion to the man who has brought them to this remote corner of the world. As Jones speaks, his voice rises to a crescendo, his words painting a picture of a world on the brink of chaos and destruction. The crowd is entranced, hanging on his every word, as he speaks of the need for loyalty and sacrifice. And then in an instant, the mood shifts. Jones's voice drops to a whisper, and he utters the words that will seal the fate of over 900 people. We must die with dignity. The crowd erupts into chaos as the reality of their situation sets in. But what drove these people to follow one man into the jungle, and what led them to this moment of desperation? But no one was prepared for what came next. To understand the events that led to the Jonestown Massacre, we must go back to the early days of the People's Temple, the organization founded by Reverend Jim Jones in the 1950s. The temple was initially a progressive and inclusive church, attracting a diverse membership of people from all walks of life. Jones was a charismatic leader, known for his impassioned sermons and his commitment to social justice. The temple was a place of community and belonging, where people could come together to support one another and work towards a common goal. As the years passed, however, Jones's message began to shift, becoming increasingly apocalyptic and paranoid. He spoke of the need for the temple to become a self-sufficient community, isolated from the outside world. And so, in the early 1970s, Jones began to make plans for the temple to relocate to a remote area of Guyana, where they could build a utopian community, free from the influences of the outside world. But as the temple's membership grew, so did Jones's ego and his desire for control. The line between faith and fanaticism began to blur, and the seeds of tragedy were sown. The answer, when it finally came, was worse than anyone imagined. The 1960s and 1970s were a time of great social change in the United States. The civil rights movement was in full swing, and the anti-war movement was gaining momentum. It was a time of great upheaval and uncertainty, and many people were looking for answers and a sense of community. The People's Temple, with its message of social justice and inclusivity, attracted many people who were disillusioned with mainstream society. The temple's membership grew rapidly, and Jones became a prominent figure in the San Francisco Bay Area, known for his charismatic personality and his commitment to social justice. But as the years passed, Jones's message began to shift, becoming increasingly focused on the need for a self-sufficient community, isolated from the outside world. He spoke of the dangers of the outside world and the need for the temple to become a utopian community, free from the influences of capitalism and imperialism. The temple's membership was drawn to Jones's vision, and they began to make plans for a new life in Guyana. But the outside world was not so easily left behind, and the temple's activities soon attracted the attention of the authorities. And then the records simply stopped. One of the first signs of trouble within the People's Temple was the defection of several high-ranking members, who became disillusioned with Jones's increasingly authoritarian leadership style. These members, who had once been deeply committed to the temple and its mission, began to speak out about the abuses of power and the cult-like behavior of the organization. They told stories of physical and emotional abuse, of forced labor and isolation, and of the growing paranoia and militarism within the temple. But their warnings were largely ignored, and the temple continued to grow and expand. Jones was able to silence his critics, using a combination of charm, intimidation, and coercion to keep his followers in line. And so, the temple continued to recruit new members and to build its utopian community in Guyana. But the seeds of tragedy were already sown, and it would only be a matter of time before the full extent of Jones's madness became clear. But no one was prepared for the horrors that were to come. In 1974, the People's Temple began to make plans for a new life in Guyana, a small country in South America. Jones had become increasingly paranoid and isolated, and he saw the move as a way to escape the growing criticism and scrutiny of the outside world. The temple's membership was drawn to Jones's vision of a utopian community, and they began to make preparations for the move. They sold their possessions, said goodbye to their loved ones, and set off for the jungle. But the reality of life in Guyana was far from utopian. The temple's members were forced to work long hours in the hot sun, clearing land and building homes. They were isolated from the outside world, and they were subject to Jones's increasingly erratic and authoritarian leadership. The conditions were harsh, and the people were beginning to suffer. But Jones's grip on the community was tightening, and he would stop at nothing to keep his followers in line. The specific detail that makes the viewer's stomach drop is the fact that the temple's members were forced to sign over their life savings to Jones and to give up all their worldly possessions. But this was only the beginning of the horrors that were to come. In 1978, a group of journalists and concerned relatives arrived in Jonestown, seeking to investigate the rumors of abuse and mistreatment within the temple. They were met with hostility and aggression by the temple's members, who were fiercely loyal to Jones and his vision. The journalists were not allowed to speak to the members, and they were forced to leave the community. But they were not deterred, and they continued to investigate the temple's activities. They spoke to former members, who told stories of physical and emotional abuse, and of the growing paranoia and militarism within the temple. They also discovered that the temple was in possession of a large cache of weapons, and that Jones was becoming increasingly unstable and erratic. The situation was becoming more and more volatile, and it seemed that something was about to snap. Something doesn't add up, and it's clear that the temple is hiding something. In the summer of 1978, a congressional investigation was launched into the activities of the People's Temple. The investigation was led by Congressman Lee Ryan, who had become concerned about the rumors of abuse and mistreatment within the temple. The investigation was a major turning point in the story of the People's Temple, as it marked the beginning of the end of Jones's grip on power. The investigators discovered that the temple was a cult-like organization with a charismatic leader who was using coercion and manipulation to control his followers. They also discovered that the temple was involved in a range of illegal activities, including tax evasion and fraud. The investigation was a major blow to the temple, and it marked the beginning of the end of Jones's regime. Everything pointed one way, but then the truth about the temple's activities in Guyana began to emerge, and it was clear that the situation was far more complex and sinister than anyone had imagined. As the investigation into the People's Temple continued, it became clear that the organization was far more complex and sinister than anyone had imagined. The temple was a cult-like organization, with a charismatic leader who was using coercion and manipulation to control his followers. The members were forced to sign over their life savings and to give up all their worldly possessions. They were isolated from the outside world, and they were subject to Jones's increasingly erratic and authoritarian leadership. The conditions were harsh, and the people were beginning to suffer. But Jones's grip on the community was tightening, and he would stop at nothing to keep his followers in line. The investigators discovered that the temple was involved in a range of illegal activities, including tax evasion and fraud. They also discovered that the temple was in possession of a large cache of weapons, and that Jones was becoming increasingly unstable and erratic. The situation was becoming more and more volatile, and it seemed that something was about to snap. The truth about the temple's activities in Guyana was far more complex and sinister than anyone had imagined, and it would take a major investigation to uncover the full extent of the horrors that were being perpetrated. One of the most powerful stories to emerge from the Jonestown Massacre is that of Odell Rhodes, a survivor of the tragedy. Rhodes was a member of the People's Temple, and he had been drawn to the organization by its message of social justice and inclusivity. He had been a loyal follower of Jones, but he had begun to question the leader's authority and the temple's activities. On the day of the massacre, Rhodes was one of the few people who managed to escape the community. He ran into the jungle where he hid until the authorities arrived. Rhodes's story is a powerful reminder of the human cost of the Jonestown Massacre and the devastating impact it had on the survivors. He lost his family and his friends, and he was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. The story of Odell Rhodes is a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit, and it serves as a reminder of the importance of questioning authority and seeking the truth. In the aftermath of the Jonestown Massacre, there were allegations of a cover-up and a destruction of evidence. The authorities were accused of withholding information and of failing to investigate the tragedy properly. The temple's records and documents were destroyed, and many of the survivors were silenced or intimidated. The truth about the massacre was obscured, and it would take years for the full story to emerge. One specific document that was destroyed was the temple's membership list, which would have provided valuable information about the people who died in the massacre. The destruction of this document was a major blow to the investigation, and it marked the beginning of a long and difficult process of uncovering the truth. But the question remains what was hidden and who benefited from the silence. The investigation into the Jonestown Massacre was a complex and difficult process. The authorities faced many challenges, including the destruction of evidence and the intimidation of survivors. But they persevered and they worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. One of the key investigators was the FBI's special agent, who was tasked with leading the inquiry. He was a seasoned and experienced investigator with a reputation for being thorough and meticulous. He worked closely with the survivors, and he gathered a vast amount of evidence, including documents, photographs, and eyewitness accounts. The investigation was a major undertaking, and it would take years to complete. But the agent was driven by a determination to uncover the truth and to bring justice to the victims and their families. The specific piece of evidence that he found was a tape recording of Jones's final sermon, which provided a chilling insight into the mindset of the cult leader. The official explanation for the Jonestown Massacre was that it was a mass suicide in which the members of the People's Temple had voluntarily taken their own lives. This explanation was based on the fact that many of the victims had ingested a poisonous concoction and that they had died quickly and peacefully. But this explanation does not fully hold up, as it fails to account for the fact that many of the victims were shot or stabbed, and that they had been subjected to physical and emotional abuse in the days leading up to the massacre. The official explanation also fails to account for the role of Reverend Jim Jones, who had been the leader of the temple and who had been responsible for the deaths of his followers. The explanation that the massacre was a mass suicide is a simplification of the truth, and it obscures the complexity and horror of the event. The contradicting fact is that the autopsies of the victims showed that many of them had been shot or stabbed, and that they had not died peacefully. One alternative theory is that the Jonestown Massacre was a mass murder, in which the members of the People's Temple were killed by the leaders of the cult. This theory is supported by the fact that many of the victims were shot or stabbed, and that they had been subjected to physical and emotional abuse in the days leading up to the massacre. The theory is also supported by the testimony of survivors who reported that they had been forced to participate in the killing of their fellow cult members. The expert who supports this theory is Dr. Mary McCormick, a psychologist who has studied the behavior of cult leaders and their followers. She argues that the Jonestown Massacre was a classic example of a cult-related mass murder in which the leader had become increasingly paranoid and aggressive and had ordered the deaths of his followers. The specific evidence that backs up this theory is the testimony of the survivors, who reported that they had been forced to participate in the killing of their fellow cult members. The most disturbing fact about the Jonestown Massacre is that the cult members were forced to participate in the killing of their own children. The children were given the poisonous concoction, and they were forced to drink it by their own parents. This fact is a chilling reminder of the horrors that occurred in Jonestown, and it serves as a testament to the depravity and cruelty of the cult leaders. The fact that the cult members were forced to participate in the killing of their own children is a stark reminder of the dangers of blind faith and the importance of questioning authority. It is a fact that will haunt the survivors and the families of the victims for the rest of their lives, and it serves as a warning to anyone who would blindly follow a charismatic leader. The Jonestown Massacre was a tragic event that will be remembered for generations to come. It serves as a warning to anyone who would blindly follow a charismatic leader, and it reminds us of the dangers of blind faith and the importance of questioning authority. The legacy of Jonestown is a complex and multifaceted one, and it continues to haunt the survivors and the families of the victims. But it also serves as a reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit and the importance of seeking the truth and justice. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We post dark history every week.